The emergency beacon cut through static like a knife through silk. David Reed heard it first as a whisper, then as a scream. His cargo hauler drifted through the empty corridor of space, 3 days from the nearest human settlement. When the distress signal found him, he should have ignored it. Every regulation in the book said so. The frequency was wrong, the encryption was foreign, and most damning of all, the signature was Draknir. Dragon ladies, soldiers called them. Scaled warriors who had killed thousands of humans in border skirmishes over the past 20 years. Their empire stretched across 40 star systems, and their military caste knew only combat and honor. David's fingers hovered over the console. One button would log the signal and forward it to military command. The other would set a course toward the source. Between those two buttons lay the difference between duty and something else, something that had been gnawing at him since his daughter died 3 years ago on a colony world, while waiting for rescue that came too late. He pressed the second button. The wayward sun turned on her axis, thrusters firing in controlled bursts. She was old, this ship, older than some of the colonies she supplied. Her hull bore scars from micrometeorite impacts and rough landings. David had bought her with his military pension after leaving the service, choosing cargo runs over the nightmares that came with being a combat pilot. The debris field appeared on his screens 20 minutes later. Twisted metal floated in the void, still glowing in places where fires had burned before the vacuum snuffed them out. He recognized the design as Draknir, but also human. 2 ships had died here, locked in combat until mutual destruction became the only certainty. The beacon grew stronger. David's sensors swept through the wreckage until they found the source. An escape pod, small and angular, tumbled slowly among the remains of its mothership. Its power signature was fading. Whatever life support it had was measured in minutes, not hours. David maneuvered closer. His hands moved across the controls with practiced ease, compensating for the gravitational eddies created by the larger debris. The wayward sun was a cargo hauler, not built for precision work, but David had been flying her for 5 years. He knew her rhythms like he knew his own heartbeat. The pod filled his forward view screen. Through the small viewport, he could see movement inside. Something alive. Someone alive. His targeting computer automatically painted the pod with a weapons lock. Years of military programming still embedded in the ship's systems. David overrode it manually. He activated the external cameras and zoomed in. The figure inside the pod wore Draknir battle armor, the kind their warrior caste used in ship-to-ship combat. The armor was breached in several places, and through the cracks he could see scales that had been burned black. The warrior's face was visible through the helmet, reptilian features twisted in pain. Their eyes met across the void, amber eyes that glowed faintly even in the dying light of the pod. David had seen Draknir before, but only through gun sights and tactical displays. Never this close, never this personal. His communications panel blinked. The pod was trying to send a message. David hesitated, then opened the channel. The voice that came through was rough, each word forced out through obvious agony. Human vessel, do not approach. I am Shivara of the Crimson Talons. My pod is contaminated with acid fire. Salvage is forbidden. Leave now. David studied the readings. The pod's hull showed signs of chemical burns, likely from a weapons malfunction. The warrior inside was dying from multiple injuries. He could see it in the way she moved, the trembling in her clawed hands as they tried to operate the failing console. This is David Reed of the Wayward Sun. Your life support is failing. I'm bringing you aboard. Silence stretched between them. Then the Draknir warrior spoke again, her voice weaker. You do not understand. I am your enemy. I have killed your kind in battle. Saving me violates your protocols and my honor. Leave me to die with dignity. David's jaw tightened. He had heard speeches about honor before, usually from officers who sent young soldiers to die for political reasons. His daughter had died because of honor, because evacuating civilians from a contested colony would have violated some treaty clause that mattered more than lives. I don't care about honor, David said. You're hurt and I can help. That's all that matters. He activated the docking sequence. The Wayward Sun extended her recovery arm, a mechanical limb designed for salvaging cargo pods. The sensors warned him about the chemical contamination, about the risk of bringing enemy personnel aboard, about a dozen other dangers. David ignored them all. The Draknir warrior tried to argue, but her voice was fading. David worked quickly, guiding the damaged pod into his cargo bay. The process took 8 minutes that felt like hours. When the pod finally settled onto the deck plating, David was already suited up and heading down. The cargo bay was cold and dark. Emergency lights cast long shadows across the walls. David approached the pod carefully, medical kit in one hand, cutting torch in the other. The pod's hatch was jammed, damaged by whatever explosion had forced the warrior to abandon her ship. He cut through the locks. Sparks flew in the thin atmosphere. When the hatch finally gave way, David pulled it open and looked inside. Shivara stared back at him. Up close, she was larger than he expected, nearly 7 feet of muscle and scales. Her armor was melted in places, fused to her skin. Burns covered her torso and left arm. One of her legs was bent at an angle that made David wince. "Too late for me," she whispered. Her amber eyes were dimming. "Should have listened. Should have left. Now you risk everything for nothing." David climbed into the pod. The space was tight, barely enough room for one Draknir, certainly not enough for a human as well. He didn't care. He opened his medical kit and pulled out a plasma injector loaded with broad-spectrum painkillers. "I've been too late before," David said quietly. He pressed the injector against her neck, finding the pulse point beneath her scales. "Not this time." Shivara tried to push his hand away, but her strength was gone. The painkiller hit her system and her eyes went wide, then soft. David worked quickly, applying emergency sealant to the worst burns, stabilizing her leg with an inflatable splint, hooking up a portable oxygen unit adapted for her biology. "Why?" she asked. The word was barely a breath. David looked at her. Really looked at her. Beneath the warrior's armor and the alien features, he saw what he had seen in every dying person he had ever encountered. Fear, pain, the desperate wish to live just a little longer. "Because somebody has to," he said. He lifted her from the pod. She was heavy, far heavier than a human, but David had loaded cargo for 5 years. He carried her through the bay into the ship's small medical cabin and laid her on the examining table. Her blood was dark purple, almost black, and there was too much of it on his suit. David stripped away the ruined armor and began the real work. His hands moved with methodical precision, cleaning wounds, sealing ruptures, administering medications that his ship's database said might work on Draknir physiology. Might. The word echoed in his mind as he worked. Hours passed. Shivara drifted in and out of consciousness. Each time she woke, she looked at David with those amber eyes, confusion, and something else mixing in their depths. Each time she asked the same question in different ways. Why was he doing this? What did he want? What was his price? David never answered. He just kept working. When her vital signs finally stabilized, when the immediate danger had passed, David allowed himself to slump against the wall. His entire body ached. His hands shook from exhaustion. But Shivara was breathing steadily, her heart's beating in the syncopated rhythm unique to her species. Outside the medical cabin, an alarm began to sound. David pulled himself to his feet and stumbled to the bridge. His sensors showed 3 contacts approaching fast. Draknir interceptors, their weapons hot, their trajectories locked on the wayward sun. They had found their missing warrior. And they were not coming to thank him. 3 red dots converged on David's navigation display like predators circling wounded prey. The Draknir interceptors moved with precision that spoke of years of combat training. Their formation was tight, weapon systems already charged and ready. David's hands flew across the console, trying to calculate options that didn't end with his ship torn apart. The communications channel crackled to life without his permission. They had overridden his systems with military-grade intrusion software. A voice filled the bridge, cold and sharp as broken glass. "Human vessel, you are in possession of Draknir military personnel. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will result in immediate destruction." David glanced at the medical cabin display. Shivara lay motionless on the table, her breathing shallow but steady. Moving her now would kill her as surely as leaving her in that pod would have. The medical equipment keeping her alive was hardwired into his ship's power grid. Disconnecting it meant death. "This is the wayward son," David said into the comm. "I'm carrying a critically injured patient. She needs medical care, not a military extraction. Give me time to stabilize her condition." Laughter echoed through the speakers. Not humor, but something darker. "You presume to tell us about our own warrior? You who are little more than cargo trash flying a ship held together with wire and hope? Shavara of the Crimson Talons belongs to the Draknir Empire. You have stolen property of our military. David's jaw clenched. Property. They called her property. He had spent 6 hours keeping that property alive while her own people did nothing but threaten him. She's a person, not property, David said, and she's staying here until she's stable enough to move. The lead interceptor fired a warning shot. The plasma bolt streaked past the Wayward Sun's bow, close enough that David's proximity alarm screamed. His shields flickered under the thermal wash. Another shot like that aimed center mass would cut through his cargo hauler like paper. Final warning, human. Surrender our warrior or be destroyed. David looked at his options. The asteroid field behind him was dense, a graveyard of rock and ice left over from a planetary collision millions of years ago. His ship was slow and ungainly, but she was small. The interceptors were faster, better armed, but they were also larger. In that maze of spinning stone, size became a disadvantage. It was a stupid plan. Suicidal, even. David engaged the thrusters. The Wayward Sun lurched forward, then dove hard to starboard. The sudden acceleration threw David against his restraints. Behind him, the medical cabin's automated systems kicked in, magnetic locks securing Shavara to the table. The interceptors hesitated for half a second, surprised by the audacity of a cargo hauler choosing flight over surrender. That half-second was all David needed. He plunged into the asteroid field at a speed that made his hull groan in protest. Proximity warnings filled the bridge with noise until David muted them all. He flew by instinct and by sight, threading through gaps between tumbling rocks that were measured in meters. The Wayward Sun was not built for this kind of flying, but David was. The interceptors followed. They were better pilots and better ships, but they flew with caution, born of expensive training and irreplaceable equipment. David flew with the recklessness of someone who had already lost everything that mattered. He cut inside their turning radius, used their own weapons fire to shatter asteroids into clouds of fragments that fouled their sensors, and pushed his ship beyond every safety limit. A chunk of rock the size of a house tumbled directly into his path. David rolled the Wayward Sun 90 degrees and slipped past with centimeters to spare. One of the interceptors tried to follow and clipped the asteroid with its wing. The impact sent the fighter spinning out of control into a cluster of smaller rocks. David heard the explosion through his sensors. 2 interceptors left. They split up, trying to flank him from above and below. David cut his main engines and fired his maneuvering thrusters in a pattern that sent the Wayward Sun into a flat spin. The world outside became a blur of stars and stone. The interceptors overshot, their targeting computers unable to track something moving so erratically. David reversed thrust and came out of the spin pointed back the way he came. He saw one interceptor directly ahead, its pilot still trying to reorient. For a moment, David's finger hovered over his own weapons trigger. He had 2 mining lasers mounted on his cargo arms, weak things meant for cutting through ice, not combat. But at this range, into the interceptor's engine vents, they might do damage. He didn't fire. Instead, he dumped his entire cargo hold. 20 tons of medical supplies, sealed containers that had been destined for a frontier colony, tumbled into space between him and the interceptor. The Draknir pilot tried to evade, but there were too many. Too close, too fast. Containers smashed into the fighter's hull, crumpling armor and shattering viewports. David felt sick. Those supplies would have saved lives. Now they were debris. The last interceptor was closing fast from above. David could see it on his dorsal cameras, weapons charging for a killing shot. He had nowhere left to run, no more tricks to pull. The Wayward Sun's engines were overheating, her hull stressed beyond limits, her pilot exhausted. Then a voice filled the bridge. Weak, pained, but unmistakable. Shavara had accessed his communication system from the medical cabin. High Talons Veyrath, she said in her own language. David's computer translated in real time. I am Shavara. Cease your attack. The human speaks truth. I am broken. Moving me will end my life. Silence. The interceptor held its position, weapons still locked on David's ship. Shavara of the Crimson Talons, a new voice responded, female, older, carrying the weight of command. You accepted enemy aid. You allowed a human to touch you, to see you in weakness. Your scales are forever stained. You are no longer Draknir. David heard Shavara's labored breathing through the internal comm. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. Then I am no longer Draknir, but I am alive. The human chose my life over his safety. He violated his laws to save me. If that is stained, then let me be stained. If that is weakness, then I embrace weakness. Because I breathe high talons, I breathe when I should be dust. The interceptor didn't fire, didn't move. David watched his sensors, waiting for the energy spike that would mean his death. It didn't come. You speak heresy, Veyrath said. I speak truth, Shivara replied. This human abandoned his controls to restart my hearts. I saw it, I felt it. He risked his ship, his life, his freedom for one he should hate. Tell me, High Talons, when did we forget that there is honor in mercy? The silence stretched. David's ship drifted in the asteroid field, engines cooling, systems barely holding together. Through his cameras, he could see the interceptor, still dangerous, still deadly, but something had changed in the quality of that silence. Remain where you are, Veyrath said finally. I am contacting our fleet command. And the human military. This situation requires wisdom beyond combat protocols. The interceptor withdrew to a safe distance but didn't leave. David slumped in his chair, every muscle trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline crash. He had somehow survived, but he wasn't sure for how long. A flicker on his long-range sensors made his blood run cold. More ships incoming. Human ships this time, responding to the automated distress signal his ship had sent when the Draknir first appeared. A destroyer and 2 frigates, enough firepower to turn this asteroid field into a shooting gallery. David dragged himself out of his chair and stumbled to the medical cabin. Shivara watched him enter, her amber eyes tracking his movement. The medical equipment beeped steadily around her, showing vital signs that had improved from critical to merely terrible. You should have let me die, she said quietly. Would have been simpler. David checked her IV lines and adjusted the flow of synthetic blood his ship's fabricator had managed to create. It wasn't perfect, but it was keeping her alive. Simpler isn't always better, he said. How are you feeling? Like I was burned by acid fire and crashed in an escape pod, Shivara said. A pause. You destroyed your cargo to save me. Those containers, I saw them on your manifest. Medical supplies for a colony world. They're just things, David said. You're alive. Those things would have saved lives. So will you. David met her eyes. Someday. When you're healed. When you're strong again. You'll save someone else and they'll save someone else, and maybe that's worth a few tons of bandages and antibiotics. Shivara studied him with an intensity that made David uncomfortable. Her species had predatory ancestry, and even injured and weak, there was something dangerous in her gaze. What happened to you? She asked. What made you like this? David turned away, busying himself with equipment that didn't need adjusting. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. You are not normal for your kind. I have fought humans. They are brave, sometimes foolish, but they follow their pack loyalty. Their tribe. Their nation. You broke those bonds for me. Why? David's hand stopped moving. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then quietly he told her about his daughter. About the colony raid. About waiting for rescue ships that arrived 6 hours too late, because some admiral decided that risking vessels in contested space violated engagement protocols. About holding his daughter's hand as she died from injuries that any basic medical care could have treated. Her name was Rachel, David said. She was 9 years old. She liked drawing pictures of stars. After she died, I couldn't stay in the military. Couldn't follow orders from people who thought procedures mattered more than lives. So I bought this ship and started running supplies to places that needed them. And when you saw me, Shivara said slowly, you saw another person dying while others debated protocols. I saw someone who needed help, David said. That's all. Outside, the human warships had arrived. David's communications panel lit up with incoming hails.
He ignored them, focused on adjusting Shivara's pain medication.
Her breathing had become labored again, stress from speaking taking its toll on her damaged body. Rest, David said. I'll handle whatever comes next. Shivara's clawed hand shot out and grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. Listen to me, human. What comes next will not be easy. Both our peoples will want to punish us. Mine for my weakness, yours for your mercy. They will make us symbols of everything they fear about peace. Then let them, David said. I'm not afraid. You should be. Shivara's grip tightened. But I am grateful you are not, because I think we just started something that neither of our empires can stop. She released his wrist and closed her eyes, exhausted. David stood there for a moment, watching her breathe, wondering if she was right. Then he returned to the bridge to face whatever judgment was coming. The human destroyer hung in space like a blade, all sharp angles and weapon ports. Captain Louise Reeves commanded from her bridge with 30 years of military experience behind every decision. She had fought the Draknir in 4 major engagements and countless skirmishes. She had lost friends to their weapons, watched colonies burn under their attacks. Now she stared at a cargo hauler caught between species, and she felt very tired. Status on the Wayward Sun? She asked her tactical officer. Engines are shot, life support is barely functional, and he's got a Draknir warrior in his medical bay. Sir, he actually brought one of them aboard his ship. Voluntarily. Reeves leaned back in her chair. The Draknir interceptor maintained position a few kilometers away. Weapons powered down but ready. A fragile standoff, one wrong word from becoming a bloodbath. Her orders from Fleet Command were clear. Secure the situation, detain the pilot, deliver the Draknir to neutral custody. Simple on paper, complicated in reality. She opened a direct channel to the Wayward Sun. Lieutenant Reed, this is Captain Louise Reeves of the destroyer Valiant. Power down your remaining systems and prepare to be taken under tow. The response came after a delay. David's voice sounded hollow with exhaustion. Captain, I have a patient who can't be moved. Her condition is stable but critical. Any transfer right now could kill her. That patient is enemy personnel, Reeves said, and you are in violation of approximately 47 military regulations. I'm bringing you in, Lieutenant. That's not negotiable. Then you'll have to shoot me, Captain, because I'm not letting her die because of paperwork. Reeves closed her eyes. Of course he wasn't. She pulled up David's service record on her secondary display. Decorated combat pilot, 15 years of service. Honorable discharge after personal tragedy. Exemplary marks across the board until his daughter died on his watch at Colony 7. Then a quiet resignation and disappearance into civilian life. She understood more than she wanted to. Lieutenant, I'm not your enemy here, Reeves said carefully. But I have a Draknir warship waiting for me to make a mistake. They want their warrior back. I want to keep this from turning into an incident that kills us all. Work with me. How? David asked. How do I work with you without abandoning her? Before Reeves could answer, the Draknir interceptor moved. It oriented toward the Valiant, weapons charging. Reeves's tactical officer shouted a warning. Shields came up automatically. The bridge lighting shifted to combat red. Then a new voice cut through all channels. I am High Talons Veyrath of the Draknir Imperial Fleet. I speak for the warrior you hold. We demand her immediate return. Reeves took a slow breath. I am Captain Louise Reeves. The human you refer to claims your warrior is too injured to move safely. Perhaps we can arrange a medical team to examine her condition. We do not negotiate with humans over our own personnel. And we don't hand over civilians without due process, Reeves shot back. Like it or not, High Talons, we have a situation here that requires both of us to be reasonable. Silence. Then Veyrath spoke again, her tone shifting slightly. The human pilot. He is military? Former military. He's a civilian cargo hauler now. Yet he flies like a warrior. My pilots say he destroyed one of my interceptors and damaged another using a ship meant for freight. They say he fought not with weapons but with cunning. Is this true? Reeves glanced at her tactical officer, who nodded confirmation. Apparently so. And the warrior, Shivara. She says he saved her life, that he risked everything to pull her from death. Your warriors do this often? Save enemies? No, Reeves admitted. That's not standard procedure. Then this David Reed is unusual among your kind. Very unusual. Another pause. When Veyrath spoke again, there was something different in her voice. Not quite respect, but perhaps recognition. I propose neutrality. Station Unity, 3 days from here. Coalition space. We escort the human vessel together. No weapons fire, no interference. There we let others decide what is just. Reeves considered. Station Unity was neutral ground, maintained by the Coalition of Free Worlds as a diplomatic outpost. Both human and Draknir ambassadors operated there, along with a dozen other species. It was as close to fair ground as existed in this sector of space. I accept, Reeves said, but the human has to agree as well. She switched back to David's channel. Lieutenant, you hear that proposal? I heard it, David said. Will she be safe there? Safer than here, Reeves said. You've got both our militaries ready to shoot each other over you. Station Unity takes that gun away from everyone's head. And after? What happens after? I don't know, Reeves admitted. But I'd rather find out there than here. David was quiet for a long time. Then, okay, I'll go. But I need a promise from both of you. No one touches Shivara without my permission until we reach the station. She's my patient and my responsibility. You cannot make demands, human, Veyrath said. Watch me, David replied. I've already broken enough laws that a few more don't matter. You want her alive, you go through me, both of you. Reeves almost smiled. The man had steel in him. Agreed, Lieutenant. She's your responsibility until we dock at Station Unity. High Talons? The Draknir commander took longer to answer. This is highly irregular, but I accept. The human may keep his charge. For now. And so began the strangest convoy Reeves had ever led. The Valiant took point. The Wayward Sun limped along in the center, and Veyrath's remaining interceptor followed behind. 2 frigates flanked the formation, and somewhere in the dark, more Draknir ships paced them just beyond sensor range. Trust but verify, the motto of every military in the galaxy. 3 days to Station Unity. 3 days of watching that fragile peace hold, together with nothing but willpower and the curiosity of 2 species about what came next. Reeves visited David on the 2nd day. She took a shuttle across to the Wayward Sun, accompanied by a medical team and 2 Marines. David met them at the airlock, wearing clothes that hadn't been changed in days and sporting a beard that had gone from stubble to scraggly. Captain, he said, come to arrest me. Not yet, Reeves said. Wanted to see how you're managing. And to check on your patient. David led them through his ship. Reeves noted the age of everything, the patches and repairs that spoke of maintenance done by hand on a tight budget. This was not a man who had gotten rich hauling cargo. This was someone getting by. The medical cabin was small but surprisingly well equipped. Shivara lay on the table, awake now, her amber eyes tracking the visitors. She wore a medical gown that David had clearly modified to fit her larger frame. Burns covered her visible skin, healing but still angry and red beneath her dark scales. Captain Reeves, Shivara said in heavily accented standard. You come to judge? I come to understand, Reeves said. She looked at David. Can I speak with her alone? David hesitated, then nodded. He and the medical team stepped outside. The Marines stayed, but Reeves waved them to the far corner. She pulled up a chair next to the examination table. I fought your kind for years, Reeves said. Lost good people to Draknir weapons. Now I'm supposed to protect you. Tell me why I should. Shivara's clawed hand moved to touch the burns on her arm. Because I am no longer Draknir. I am something else now. Something your David Reed made. He didn't make you anything. He just kept you alive. You do not understand. In my culture, to accept help from an enemy is to accept that you are weak. Weakness is death, not physical death, but death of the self. I should have refused. Should have died in that pod with honor intact. But he did not give me choice. He simply acted. So you're angry at him? No, Shivara looked at the ceiling. I am grateful, and confused, and frightened of what this gratitude means. Because if he is right, if mercy matters more than honor, then everything I was taught is wrong. Everything I fought for is hollow. Do you know what that feels like, Captain? To have your entire existence questioned by one simple act? Reeves thought about Colony 7, about the admiral who delayed rescue because protocol said so, about David's daughter dying while ships capable of helping stayed away, about how that same admiral got promoted, while David resigned in disgust. Yeah, Reeves said quietly. I know exactly what that feels like. Shivara turned her head to look at Reeves directly. Then you understand why this cannot stay quiet, why your superiors and mine will want to bury this, because we are proof that the war is unnecessary, that enemies can be more than enemies. I can't promise anything, Reeves said. I don't control what happens at Station Unity. But you can speak for us. You who have fought and lost. You know the cost of honor that values pride over life. Speak and others may listen. Reeves stood. I'll do what I can. But Shivara, you need to understand. There are people on both sides who profit from this war, who need us to hate each other. They won't let go easily. Then we fight them, Shivara said. Not with weapons, with truth. The truth that a human named David Reed chose life over protocol. And that choice saved me. Reeves left the medical cabin and found David in the corridor pacing. He looked up when she emerged. She okay? He asked. She's fine. More than fine, actually. Reeves studied him. You know you've made a lot of powerful people very uncomfortable, right? Both human and Draknir. They're going to want to make an example of you. Let them, David said. I did the right thing. That's all that matters. The right thing gets people killed, Lieutenant. I've seen it happen. Then maybe we need more people willing to die for the right thing, instead of living for the convenient thing. Reeves had no answer for that. She returned to her shuttle, her mind churning with thoughts she couldn't quite organize. That evening, alone in her quarters, she began writing a report. Not the official one, which would be dry and factual and carefully worded to avoid taking sides. This was personal, addressed to Fleet Command, explaining exactly what she had witnessed and what she thought it meant. She knew it would probably be ignored, filed away and forgotten by people who made decisions from comfortable offices, light years from the bleeding edge. But she wrote it anyway, because Shivara was right. Truth mattered, even if no one wanted to hear it. Station Unity appeared on their sensors on the third day. It hung in space at a Lagrange point between two stars, a massive wheel slowly turning to create artificial gravity. Ships from 24 species docked at its ports. It was as close to neutral ground as the galaxy offered. It was also where David Reed's quiet act of mercy would become something much larger than either of them intended. Station Unity resembled a flower built from steel and light, petals of docking arms extending from a central hub that housed diplomatic quarters and chambers, where species met to argue instead of shoot. David had never been here before. His cargo routes kept him to the rough edges of human space, places where people needed supplies more than politics. Now he docked at Port 12 under escort, human marines on one side, Draknir warriors on the other, and medical teams from 3 different species waiting to examine Shivara. The coordination required to arrange all this had taken hours of negotiation, every detail argued over by people who trusted each other about as far as they could throw a battleship. David helped transfer Shivara to a hover stretcher. She was stronger now, able to sit up and speak without pain clouding every word, but still far from healed. The burns had begun to scar in patterns across her scales. She would carry those marks forever. "Stay close," she whispered as the medical team arrived. "I do not trust them." "I'm not leaving you," David promised. The neutral medical facility was staffed by Quellan physicians, a species that looked like upright salamanders and had a reputation for absolute impartiality. They examined Shivara with efficient thoroughness while David waited outside, pacing the corridor like an expectant father. Captain Reeves found him there. "Lieutenant, we need to talk about what happens next." "I'm not leaving until she's cleared," David said. "That's not what I mean. There's going to be a hearing. Both governments want answers. The coalition is providing the forum, but this is going to be part trial, part diplomatic incident, and completely unprecedented." David stopped pacing. "A trial? For what exactly? For you? Violation of military protocols. Unauthorized contact with enemy personnel. Reckless endangerment. They've got a list. For Shivara? Accepting enemy aid, bringing dishonor to her caste, possibly treason depending on how angry the Draknir Empire wants to get. That's insane. I saved her life, I know. But both our governments are scared, David. Scared of what you represent. Because if one cargo pilot can ignore generations of hatred and just help someone, it makes everyone who profits from that hatred look like fools, or worse, villains. David leaned against the wall. He was so tired. Not just physically, though 3 days of barely sleeping had taken their toll. He was tired of systems that valued rules over lives, of people who chose convenience over compassion, of a galaxy that seemed determined to divide itself into us and them, until nothing remained but endless conflict. "What do you think will happen?" he asked. Reeves looked uncomfortable. "Honestly, I think they'll make an example of you. Some kind of punishment to discourage others from following your lead. Something that sends a message that the proper channels matter more than individual conscience. And Shivara, the Draknir are harder to read, but from what I understand of their culture, she's already been marked as dishonored. The question is whether they execute her to restore their pride or exile her to forget she existed." David's hands curled into fists. "Neither of those things is happening. You can't stop it. Watch me." The Quellan doctor emerged before Reeves could respond. She chirped in her species language, then switched to standard. "The patient is stable. Injuries are healing within expected parameters. She has requested to speak with both of you." They found Shivara sitting up on the examination table, looking more alert than David had seen her since pulling her from that escape pod. The burns still covered her skin, but they had been treated with advanced regenerative compounds that would minimize scarring. She would never look the same, but she would survive. They tell me there will be a hearing, Shivara said. A trial to determine our fate. We'll fight it, David said. Both of us together. Shivara's amber eyes softened. You still do not understand what you have done, do you? You did not just save one life, David Reed. You challenged the foundation of everything my people believe. Honor, strength, superiority. These are the pillars of Draknir culture. You shattered them with simple kindness. I don't care about pillars. I care about you. That is why you are dangerous. Shivara reached out and took his hand, a gesture that made Reeves's eyebrows rise. In Draknir culture, touching was reserved for combat or intimacy. There was no casual contact. That is why they fear you. Because you care when you are supposed to hate. Because you act when you are supposed to follow orders. Because you make people question everything they think they know. The hearing convened 2 days later in the station's largest chamber, a circular room with viewing galleries that were packed with spectators from dozens of species. News of the incident had spread across the local networks. Human saves Draknir warrior. The story was too strange, too unexpected to ignore. David sat at one table with Reeves beside him, acting as his advocate. Shivara sat at another table with a Draknir legal representative who looked like she would rather be anywhere else. Between them sat 3 human judges, 3 Draknir arbiters, and 1 coalition mediator who looked like a cross between a bird and a philosopher. The human prosecutor spoke first, a sharp-faced woman named Patterson who had made her career on military law. She outlined David's crimes with clinical precision. Unauthorized contact with enemy forces, abandoning assigned delivery routes, reckless endangerment of military assets. The list went on. By the time she finished, David sounded like a traitor rather than someone who had saved a life. Lieutenant Reed, Patterson said, turning to face him directly. You took an oath when you joined the military. To follow orders, to uphold protocols, to put the needs of humanity above personal feelings. Do you deny breaking that oath? I was discharged from the military 5 years ago, David said. I'm a civilian, but you were military. Those oaths don't expire simply because you change careers. The moment you encountered that Draknir warrior, your duty was clear. Report the contact and move on. Instead, you chose to intervene. You chose to help an enemy. Why? David looked at Shivara across the chamber. She met his gaze with steady amber eyes. Because she was dying and I could help. That's reason enough, is it? Patterson paced in front of him. What about the medical supplies you destroyed? Those were meant for Colony 14, a settlement with 6,000 humans. You dumped them into space to save 1 Draknir. How do you justify that choice? I don't, David said quietly. I regret those supplies were lost, but I don't regret saving Shivara. If I could go back, I'd find a different way to evade the interceptors. But I wouldn't leave her to die. Not ever. Even if it meant human deaths, even if your actions led to more conflict, more casualties, more suffering. My actions didn't lead to any of that. Fear did. The fear that maybe, just maybe, we don't have to be enemies. That scares both our governments more than any weapon. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Patterson's jaw tightened. You presume a great deal, Lieutenant. I presume nothing. I just see what's obvious to anyone willing to look. The Draknir prosecutor rose next. He was tall even by Draknir standards, his scales dark as midnight, his eyes cold as void. He spoke in his own language, the chamber's translation systems rendering his words into standard with mechanical precision. Shivara of the Crimson Talons, you were found by an enemy. You accepted his aid. You allowed him to see you weak, broken, helpless. In doing so, you betrayed every warrior who came before you. You spat on the graves of those who died with honor. What do you say to these charges? Shivara stood slowly. The burns on her body were visible beneath the simple clothing she wore. She did not try to hide them. I say that honor which requires death is not honor. It is pride, and pride is a poor substitute for breathing. You dare mock our traditions? I dare question them. As should you. As should all of us. Shivara turned to address the entire chamber. I was taught that accepting help from enemies meant weakness, that suffering alone was noble, that death was preferable to admitting vulnerability. These teachings nearly killed me. Would have killed me, if not for one human who decided that life mattered more than honor. You have been corrupted by human sentiment, the prosecutor said with disgust. No. I have been freed from blind obedience to ideas that serve no one but those who profit from endless conflict. Shivara pointed at David. That man had every reason to hate me. My people have killed his people. We have burned his colonies, destroyed his ships, caused suffering for generations. Yet when he found me dying, he saw not an enemy but a person. He risked everything to save me. If that is corruption, then let me be corrupt. Because I would rather live corrupted by mercy than die pristine in hatred. The chamber erupted, humans arguing with humans, Draknir shouting at Draknir, other species adding their voices to the chaos. The judges called for order, but it took several minutes for the noise to subside. Captain Reeves stood. She had not planned to speak, had not been asked to testify, but she could not remain silent. I request permission to address the chamber. The coalition mediator nodded. The floor recognizes Captain Louise Reeves. Reeves walked to the center of the chamber where everyone could see her. I have fought the Draknir for 30 years. I have lost friends, comrades, people I loved to their weapons. I have every reason to want Shivara punished. To want David punished for helping her. But I stand here today to say that what Lieutenant Reed did was not a crime. It was the most human thing I've ever witnessed. She turned slowly, making eye contact with spectators throughout the gallery. We talk about humanity like it's a species designation. But it's more than that. It's a choice. The choice to help when you could harm. To show mercy when you could show cruelty. To see a person instead of an enemy. David Reed made that choice in a moment when no one was watching. When there was no glory to be won. No recognition to be gained. He did it because it was right. And if we punish him for that, we're saying that being human, truly human, is a crime. Reeves looked at the judges. I know the regulations. I know the protocols. I helped write some of them. But regulations exist to serve life, not replace it. The moment we forget that, we become machines following programming. We stop being the people we claim to protect. She sat down. Silence filled the chamber, heavy and profound. The coalition mediator spoke into that silence. This hearing is adjourned until tomorrow. The judges and arbiters will deliberate on what they have heard. David caught up with Reeves outside the chamber. Thank you. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, Reeves said. Because you were right. About all of it. And someone needed to say so. Shivara joined them, moving slowly but under her own power. What happens now? Now we wait, David said, and hope that mercy matters more than rules. And if it does not? David smiled, tired but genuine. Then we keep showing them that it should. One person at a time for as long as it takes. Shivara reached out and placed her hand on his shoulder, a gesture of respect in her culture. Then I will stand with you. For as long as I breathe, I will stand with you. They stood together while the galaxy watched and wondered what would come next. The verdict came down after 3 days of deliberation that felt like 3 years. David spent the time in a small quarters on Station Unity, unable to leave but not quite a prisoner. Shivara occupied medical housing 2 levels away. They were not allowed to meet. Rules about witnesses and contamination of testimony, though David suspected the real reason was to keep them apart, to weaken whatever bond had formed between them. It didn't work. David found himself thinking about her constantly, not in any romantic sense, but with the concern of someone who had pulled another person back from the edge of death and felt responsible for what came after. He wondered if she was healing properly, if the Draknir legal team was treating her well, if she was afraid. Captain Reeves visited on the 2nd day. She brought him food from the station's human quarter, real food instead of the nutrient paste the facility provided. They ate in silence for a while before she spoke. The deliberations are not going well, she said. The human judges are split. 2 want leniency. 1 wants to make an example of you. The Draknir are worse. 2 want Shivara executed. 1 wants exile, and none of them want to admit that maybe their entire honor system is flawed. What about the coalition mediator? He's trying to find middle ground, but there isn't much middle between freedom and execution. Reeves put down her fork. David, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that you'll be imprisoned. Maybe for years. And Shivara might face worse. David stared at his plate. The food had lost its taste. I won't let them kill her. You might not have a choice. There's always a choice. That's what this whole thing is about. Outside his window, Station Unity turned slowly in the void. David watched ships come and go, caring people who had their own problems, their own struggles, their own moments of choosing between easy and right. He wondered how many of them would have stopped for a dying enemy. He wondered if he was crazy for doing so. Then he remembered Shivara's amber eyes as life returned to them, and he knew he wasn't crazy. The galaxy was crazy. He was just trying to be sane in an insane universe. The summons came on the third day. David dressed in the only clean clothes he had, a simple jumpsuit that marked him as civilian rather than military. He met Reeves at the chamber entrance. She wore her full uniform, every medal earned in 3 decades of service displayed on her chest. A reminder to the judges that she had sacrificed for humanity and still stood with David. Shivara was already inside when they entered. She wore traditional Draknir formal clothing, a flowing garment that somehow made her look both dignified and dangerous. The burns on her face and arms were visible. She had refused cosmetic treatment. The scars were part of her story now, and she would not hide them. Their eyes met across the chamber. David nodded slightly. Shivara returned the gesture. The judges and arbiters filed in, their faces revealing nothing. The coalition mediator took his place at the center seat. He looked tired, like someone who had spent 3 days arguing with immovable objects. "We have reached our decision," the mediator said. His voice carried through the chamber's acoustics, clear and resonant. "In the matter of Lieutenant David Reed, formerly of the Human Space Defense Force, now civilian cargo pilot, the charges are as follows: unauthorized contact with enemy personnel, deviation from assigned route, violation of military engagement protocols, and reckless endangerment." David stood. His legs felt weak, but he kept them steady. The judges find that Lieutenant Reed did indeed violate stated protocols and regulations. However, the context of these violations must be considered. Lieutenant Reed is a civilian. His actions, while unorthodox, were motivated by humanitarian concern, rather than treasonous intent. Therefore, the judgment is as follows: formal reprimand to be placed in his permanent record, suspension of cargo contracts in contested space for a period of 6 months, and mandatory diplomatic training. David blinked. That was it? No prison, no execution, just a reprimand and some classes? However, the mediator continued, and David's brief hope flickered. Lieutenant Reed's actions have created an unprecedented situation, requiring unprecedented response. He will be assigned as a special courier, carrying supplies to both human and Draknir settlements as part of a new humanitarian exchange program. He will serve as proof that such cooperation is possible. Murmurs spread through the gallery, a human carrying supplies to Draknir settlements. It was unheard of, revolutionary, possibly suicidal. In the matter of Shivara of the Crimson Talons, the mediator said, and the chamber went silent. The charges are accepting enemy aid, bringing dishonor to her caste, violating warrior codes, and potential treason. The Draknir arbiters have deliberated extensively. One of the arbiters stood. She was older than the others. Scales faded to gray, but her eyes were sharp. Shivara's actions violate every tradition we hold sacred. She should face execution. This was the judgment of 2 arbiters. However, I am the third, and I dissent. Shocked whispers filled the chamber. Draknir arbiters never dissented publicly. Unity was part of their judicial tradition. I dissent, the arbiter continued, because I am old enough to remember why we created these traditions. They were meant to make us strong, to ensure our survival in a hostile galaxy. But strength that cannot bend breaks. Survival that requires death of the self is not survival. It is slow extinction. She looked directly at Shivara. This young warrior accepted help when she was dying. In doing so, she showed not weakness but wisdom. The wisdom to recognize that life has value beyond honor codes. The arbiter turned to address the entire chamber. Therefore, my judgment is this. Shivara is exiled from Draknir space as tradition demands. But this exile is not punishment. It is freedom. Freedom to forge a new path. To demonstrate that there are other ways to be strong. She will be granted asylum in coalition space and may serve alongside Lieutenant Reed in his humanitarian work, if she chooses. David's heart hammered in his chest. They weren't killing her. They were setting her free. Shivara stood. I accept this judgment. I accept exile. I accept the loss of my caste, my position, my place in Draknir society. And I choose to serve alongside David Reed to prove that the path of mercy is not weakness but evolution. The gallery erupted. Some species cheered. Others protested, and still others simply watched in fascination as two empires tried to process what had just happened. The judges called for order, but the noise continued for several minutes. When silence finally returned, the mediator spoke once more. "This hearing is concluded. Lieutenant Reed and Shivara are free to leave. May their service demonstrate that even ancient enemies can find common ground." The judges and arbiters filed out. The gallery began to empty. David stood rooted in place, unable to quite believe it was over. Reeves clapped him on the shoulder. "You did it," she said. "You crazy, stubborn, beautiful fool. You actually did it." Shivara approached, moving through the dispersing crowd. She stopped in front of David. For a long moment they simply looked at each other, two people from different worlds who had become something neither quite understood yet. "Partners?" Shivara asked. David smiled. "Partners." They left the chamber together, walking into a future neither of them had planned, but both were ready to face. The weeks that followed were not easy. David's new assignment came with restrictions, oversight, and enough bureaucratic red tape to strangle a star. His first supply run to a Draknir settlement was tense, with both species watching for any sign of trouble. The Draknir civilians treated him with suspicion at first, and the human officials who arranged the delivery looked at him like he was insane. But Shivara was there, and her presence made the difference. She spoke to her people in their own language, explained David's actions in terms they could understand, and slowly, grudgingly, they began to accept him, not as a friend, not yet, but as someone who could be trusted to deliver what he promised. The same process happened in reverse at human colonies. People who had lost loved ones to Draknir attacks had to watch David arrive with a Draknir warrior at his side. Some refused to accept deliveries from him. Some threw things. A few tried to attack Shivara, though David made it clear that anyone who wanted to hurt her would have to go through him first. But some listened. Some saw the scars on Shivara's body and asked about them, and when she told her story about the human who had saved her when he could have left her to die, some of them softened. Not everyone. Maybe not even most, but some. And that was a start. Word spread. Other Draknir warriors, young ones mostly, began to question the honor codes that had governed their lives. They saw Shivara, exiled but alive, scarred but strong, and they wondered if maybe there was another way to be warriors. A way that didn't require hating everyone different from themselves. One arrived at Station Unity 6 weeks after the trial. Her name was Talris, and she was barely old enough to have earned her warrior marks. She found Shivara in the station's public garden and knelt before her, removing her honor badges and placing them on the ground. "I wish to follow your path," Talris said. "The path of mercy. Teach me." Shivara looked at the young warrior, at the hope and determination in her eyes, and she felt something shift inside her. She had thought her exile meant loneliness, meant being cut off from her people forever. But this girl had come seeking her out, had chosen to abandon everything she knew based on Shivara's example. "Stand up," Shivara said gently. "You do not kneel to follow the path of mercy. You stand. Equal with those you help, equal with those you learn from. That is the first lesson." Talris stood. Shivara took her hands. "The second lesson is that this path is hard. Harder than combat. Harder than any trial you have faced. Because it requires changing not just your actions, but your heart. Are you ready for that?" "I am," Talris said. "I am ready." Another came the next week. Then 2 more. Within a month, a dozen young Draknir had arrived at Station Unity, all seeking to learn this new way of being warriors. All willing to accept exile from their own people for a chance to be something different. David watched it happen with growing wonder. What had started as one impulsive decision to save a dying person was becoming a movement. Not a large one, not yet, but real, tangible, growing. "You're building an army," Reeves said during one of her visits. She watched the young Draknir training in the station's gymnasium, learning human medical techniques alongside their own combat skills. "Not an army," David said. "A community. People who believe that helping others matters more than hurting them. Your government is nervous. So is the Draknir Empire. They see what's happening here and they're afraid it will spread." "Good," David said. "Maybe fear will make them think. Make them question why they need enemies so badly." Reeves smiled. "You've changed, David. When I first met you in that asteroid field, you were just a man trying to do one right thing. Now you're starting a revolution. I'm not starting anything. I'm just not stopping people who want to change." Shivara approached, Talrus and two others following her. The young Draknir looked at David with something approaching reverence which made him deeply uncomfortable. "We are ready for our first supply run," Shivara said. "All of us. We wish to see how you work, how you help without expecting gratitude or recognition." David looked at the group of young warriors, all of them scarred by their choice to follow a different path, and he felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. They were looking to him for guidance, for an example of how to be this new thing they wanted to become. "Okay," David said, "but I need you to understand something. This isn't glamorous work. It's loading cargo, flying to places nobody else wants to go, and helping people who might not even thank you. It's boring and exhausting and sometimes dangerous. Still want to come?" They all nodded, young and eager and ready to prove themselves in a way that had nothing to do with combat prowess or honor codes. "Then let's go," David said. "The Wayward Sun is waiting." 6 months after the trial, the Wayward Sun looked different. David had upgraded her with the modest stipend the Coalition provided for his humanitarian work. New engines, better life support, expanded crew quarters. She could carry more cargo now, and more importantly, more people. The young Draknir who had joined his cause needed space to live and work, and David made sure they had it. The ship smelled different too. Human coffee mixed with Draknir incense, synthetic rations alongside fresh vegetables from the hydroponic bay Talrus had installed. It smelled like cooperation, like different worlds learning to share the same air. David stood on the bridge watching the approach to New Harmony Colony. It was a human settlement, barely 3 years old, still struggling to establish agriculture in hostile soil. They needed fertilizer, seed stock, and medical supplies. The Wayward Sun carried all three, plus something the colony hadn't requested but desperately needed. "They do not know we are coming," Shivara said from the co-pilot seat. She had learned to fly over the past months, her reflexes and spatial reasoning making her a natural pilot. The humans, I mean. "They know David Reed is coming, but not that he brings Draknir. They'll adapt," David said. "They always do. Or they will shoot us, that too." David grinned. "But I'm betting on adapt." They landed in the colony's small spaceport such as it was, more of a cleared field with landing lights than a proper port. The colony administrator was waiting, a tired-looking woman named Patricia who wore dirt under her fingernails like a badge of honor. David opened the cargo ramp and descended. Patricia smiled, then froze as Shivara and the others followed him down. 5 Draknir warriors, all wearing simple work clothes rather than armor, all carrying cargo containers rather than weapons. "Reed," Patricia said carefully. "You want to explain this?" "New crew," David said. "They're here to help unload and to teach your people some Draknir agricultural techniques. Turns out they're really good at growing things in terrible soil. Something about their homeworld being mostly desert." Patricia looked at the Draknir, then at David, then back at the Draknir. "You're serious, completely. Shivara, show her what you brought." Shivara opened one of the containers. Inside were trays of seedlings, green and healthy despite being grown in space. "These are gen-modified to survive in low-water conditions. We also brought soil treatment protocols that will increase your yield by 30% within 2 growing seasons." "Why?" Patricia asked. "Why would you help us?" Shivara smiled, an expression that still looked strange on her reptilian features, but was genuine nonetheless. "Because you need help." "Is other reason necessary?" The colony was skeptical at first. People watched the Draknir with weapons close at hand, ready for betrayal. But the warriors kept their word. They unloaded cargo, taught agricultural techniques, even helped repair some of the colony's failing equipment using methods that combined human and Draknir engineering. By the 3rd day, some of the colonists were talking to them. By the 5th day, children were asking questions about their scales and their homeworld. By the time the Wayward Sun departed a week later, Patricia shook Shivara's hand and asked if they could come back. "We will," Shivara promised, "in 3 months with more supplies and more knowledge to share." It became their pattern. Human colonies, Draknir settlements, and even a few alien outposts that welcomed their help. The Wayward Sun traveled routes that made no economic sense but met needs that economics never measured. Everywhere they went, they left behind a little less fear and a little more understanding. Not everyone was happy about it. The hardliners on both sides grew more vocal, more aggressive. Someone sabotaged David's ship while docked at Station Unity, damaging his navigation system and nearly stranding them in dead space. Another time, Draknir extremists attacked Talrese when she returned briefly to visit her family, leaving her with scars that matched Shivara's. But for every person who opposed them, 2 more were inspired. Young humans volunteered to join David's crew. More Draknir warriors abandoned their honor marks and sought out Shivara's teaching. Other species took notice and began their own humanitarian efforts. The movement grew beyond anything David had imagined. What had started with one man saving one life had become a philosophy, a way of thinking that spread across dozens of worlds. They called it different things in different languages, but the idea was always the same. Helping others mattered more than ancient hatred. Mercy was strength, not weakness. The governments tried to control it, tried to regulate it, tried to make it fit into their existing frameworks of diplomacy and protocol. It didn't work. The movement was too organic, too personal, too human in the truest sense of the word. It existed in the spaces between official policy, in the moments when individuals chose compassion over convenience. A year after the trial, David received a message from Captain Reeves. She was retiring from active military service and wanted to meet him at Station Unity. When he arrived, he found her waiting in one of the station's observation decks, staring out at the stars. "Captain," David said. "Or should I say former captain?" "Louise is fine," she said. "I'm done with ranks and regulations. What will you do now?" Reeves turned to face him. "I want to join you. Your movement, your mission, whatever you want to call it. I've spent 30 years fighting wars. I want to spend whatever time I have left building peace." David was surprised. "You know it's not glamorous work. It's cargo runs and negotiations and dealing with people who hate you for trying to help them." "I know. That's why I want to do it." Reeves smiled. "You showed me something, David, you and Shivara both. You showed me that it's never too late to change, never too late to choose a different path. I want to prove that to myself and to others." She wasn't the only one. Over the following months, dozens of former soldiers from both species joined their effort. People who were tired of fighting, tired of hatred, tired of pretending that enemies had to stay enemies forever. They brought their skills, their ships, their resources, all in service of something larger than themselves. The network grew. What had been one ship became a fleet. What had been a handful of idealists became an organization. They called themselves the Mercy Corps, and they operated across contested space with the grudging permission of both governments who couldn't quite figure out how to stop them without looking like villains. David found himself less and less at the controls of the Wayward Son. He was needed for coordination, for speaking to media, for representing the movement to governments and organizations. Shivara took over most of the flying, with Talrese as her co-pilot. They were better at it than David had ever been. 2 years after the trial, David stood in the same chamber where he had been judged. But this time he was not on trial. He was there to witness a peace accord between humanity and the Draknir Empire. Not a complete peace, not yet, but a formal cessation of hostilities, a framework for cooperation, a promise to try something other than endless conflict. The ambassador from the Draknir Empire was someone David recognized. High Talon's Veyrath, the commander who had once hunted him through an asteroid field. She looked older now, tired from political battles that were harder than military ones, but she also looked satisfied, like someone who had found unexpected purpose. "Lieutenant Reed," she said, approaching him after the ceremony, or should I say Director Reed. "I hear the Mercy Corps has grown quite large." "Just David is fine," he said. "And yes, we've grown, but we're still doing the same thing. Helping people who need it." Veyrath studied him with the intensity unique to her species. "You know that you destroyed my career, yes? After I let you escape to Station Unity, after I supported leniency at your trial, I was demoted and reassigned. Everything I had worked for was taken away." "I'm sorry," David said, and meant it. "Do not be, because in losing everything, I found something I had forgotten. Purpose beyond glory, service beyond honor. I am now assigned to civilian outreach, teaching young Draknir that there are ways to be strong that do not require violence. It is, I think, more important work than commanding warships." She extended her hand in the human gesture of greeting. David shook it, and the assembled media captured the moment. A human and a Draknir, once enemies, now colleagues in building something better. Shivara found him after the ceremony ended. She wore formal clothing that mixed both their cultures, human styles modified for Draknir physiology. The scars on her face and arms were clearly visible. She never tried to hide them anymore. They were part of her story, Proof that survival was worth the marks it left behind. It is done, she said. The piece is fragile, yes, but it exists. Because of what you started. Because of what we started, David corrected. I just picked you up. You did the hard part. The hard part was accepting help. Everything after was easier. They stood together at the observation window, watching ships from both species dock peacefully at Station Unity. Some carried cargo, others passengers, all of them moving through space that had been a battlefield just years before. What now? Shivara asked. The Mercy Corps runs well without us managing every detail. We have trained others, built systems, created something that can survive without its founders. So what do? David thought about it. We go back to the beginning. Back to the wayward son. Just you, me, and whoever wants to come along. We do what we do best. Find people who need help and help them. No glory in that. No recognition. That's what makes it perfect. 3 weeks later, the wayward son departed Station Unity with a minimal crew. David at the controls, Shivara beside him, Talrus in engineering, and Louise Reeves managing communications. 4 people who had chosen mercy over hatred, cooperation over conflict, life over protocol. They flew toward the frontier, toward the edges of explored space where colonies struggled and people needed help. Behind them, the Mercy Corps continued its work, grown beyond anything David had imagined. Ahead of them lay uncertainty, danger, and the constant struggle of trying to make a difference in a galaxy that often seemed determined to tear itself apart. But they flew toward it willingly, even eagerly, because they had learned something that changed everything. One person choosing compassion could save a life. A life saved could inspire others. And enough inspired people could change the galaxy. The navigation computer beeped, indicating they had reached their first destination. A distress call from a mining operation that had suffered a catastrophic equipment failure. People were trapped, injured, dying. The nearest official rescue was 3 days away. The wayward son could be there in 8 hours. Set course, David said. Let's go save some lives. Shivara's clawed hands moved across the controls with practiced ease. The ship turned on its axis, engines firing in controlled bursts. Through the viewscreen, stars stretched into lines as they jumped to faster-than-light travel. David leaned back in his chair, remembering that day in the debris field when he had made a choice that should have been simple, but somehow changed everything. He thought about the beacon, the dying warrior, the decision between duty and compassion. He thought about his daughter who died because help came too late, and about Shivara, who lived because he refused to be too late again. You're smiling, Shivara observed. What are you thinking about? That it worked, David said. The universe tried to make us enemies, tried to make us kill each other, but we chose something else. We chose to help, and it worked. It almost killed us both. But it didn't, and now look at what we built. Shivara's amber eyes glowed softly in the bridge's dim lighting. We built a chance. Nothing more, nothing less. A chance for others to choose differently. To be better than their programming. That's enough, David said. That's more than enough. The wayward son hurtled through the void toward people who needed help, carrying medicine and supplies and something more important than either. Hope. The hope that enemies could become allies, that hatred could transform into understanding, and that one person's choice to show mercy could ripple outward until it touched worlds. 8 hours to the distressed mining operation. 8 hours to make a difference. 8 hours that some people would spend debating protocols and procedures and proper channels. David and his crew would spend it getting ready to save lives, because in the end that was what mattered, not honor codes or military regulations or political convenience. Just lives. Lives that could be saved if someone cared enough to try. The stars streamed past like promises. The wayward sun flew on. And somewhere in the vast emptiness of space, another distress beacon called out, waiting for someone to hear it, someone to come, someone to care. David Reed heard it, and he answered. Just like he always would, just like he hoped others would continue to do long after he was gone. One rescue at a time, one life at a time, one choice at a time. Building a galaxy where too late became a phrase nobody had to say. Where help always came, where mercy was the rule, not the exception. It was ambitious, maybe impossible. But David had learned something important. Impossible just meant nobody had done it yet. And every revolution, Every change, every transformation of how things worked had started the same way, with one person choosing to do the right thing, even when it was hard, even when it was dangerous, even when everyone said it couldn't be done. David Reed chose. Shivara accepted, and together they proved that humanity, the real kind that transcended species and culture and ancient hatred, was stronger than any force that tried to divide them. The mining operation appeared on the sensors. Damaged, listing, life support failing. But not failed, not yet. There was still time. Taking us in, Shivara said. Rescue team ready, Talris confirmed from engineering. Broadcasting our identity, Louise added. Let them know help is here. David watched the damaged facility grow larger on the view screen. Somewhere inside were people waiting, hoping, praying that someone would come in time. He thought about his daughter one last time, sent her a silent promise that he was keeping the vow he made over her grave. Nobody else would be too late. Not if he had anything to say about it. Let's bring them home, David said. The wayward sun descended toward the damaged facility, engines bright against the dark. A small ship carrying a simple message that echoed across the galaxy. Help is here. You are not alone. It is not too late. Never too late,